The experience of beauty is unique to humans. And it is an admiration, a form of pleasure that is not physical, or is it purely intellectual? It infuses us as so far as we are as we have senses, as we are sensory beings. And the sublime is similar. The sublime is an aesthetical experience. It's going to be an activation of our senses, which, as Abby points out, we can reflect upon. And he certainly makes the sublime seem like there's more reflection. And we can talk about that as well. But what I wanted to get across here, what do they have in common? What do beauty and sublime have in common? They're subjective, and yes, indeed. They both involve a kind of pleasure, but it's certainly not physical pleasure. And they are both aesthetical judgments, okay? So he's saying, like, among the class of aesthetical judgments, there is the appreciation of beauty, and there's the recognition of the sublime. And they are going to be quite different in many ways. Questions? All right, good. Let's get into these differences. How do they differ? And actually, I'm going to follow a cue from Abby. I'm going to put the main features of beauty in the chat first. Beauty is, well, I'll be specific. The judgment of beauty is subjective. It is universal. It is disinterested. It is singular, my favorite. And it grasps purposiveness without an idea and without an understanding of purpose, or admires without understanding of purpose. Okay, we'll go with these. All right, so how does the sublime differ from beauty?
One of them is formless.
The sublime is formless.
Counterproductive.
What do you mean? That one needs to be spelled out. Hang on to that thought, Vanessa. You can work it out. Let's see what Meg has to say.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it.
It's okay. Meg, what's up?
Well, some of the differences to me, it felt like the sublime was very kind of like inward and allowed to be kind of imbued with intimacy in a way that objective beauty isn't. The word intimacy definitely kind of comes to mind when I think about the differences. Even if it's something that can be maybe universally felt, there's still a profoundness that might come from personal connection or experiences in a way that Plato's description does not allow for.
How did you arrive at that idea, Meg?
How did I think maybe there's something in my mind that kind of connects the ephemeral with the personal and intimate, just based on kind of how the ephemeral can really relate to like emotions. Like I feel like there's more emotionality in the sublime, or kind of capability to be moved, than like the true disinterested beauty that was talked about before.
Yeah, good. I like it. Yeah, some of you noted this in your reading responses, and I didn't really get into it much, but Kant is not one for like, he doesn't really chalk up an emotional response to beauty, right? I mean, I don't think he's going to rule it out, but he's not going to make much of it. He doesn't really, as far as I can tell, he doesn't really talk about you tearing up at the sight of the beautiful rose, So I think I understand what you're getting at, Meg, but I think after we get a little further, maybe that'll become clear. So that's a nice point. I appreciate that. What else you guys want to say about? Let's hit on the obvious differences first. The sublime is formless. How is that different from beauty? Is it?
Well, because it can be more of a concept rather than like a tangible object.
Okay. I don't know. What do you mean, Tanya?
Like something that, yeah, like something that doesn't have a form or isn't a specific thing can be sublime rather than beautiful. I feel like you would more so relate to something that you can visually see. Maybe.
Okay, I know where you're going.
I think it violates the purpose of it's one of his lines.
Yes, he does say that. The sublime violates purpose.
Or like imagination, I think.
That is on, let's see what section that is for you all. That's section 23.
Yeah, page 98, if you want.
Thank you. Because I am working with different page numbers here. He does notice in this very same chapter that, you know, it's a different type of pleasure that's involved here. Well, Vanessa was getting at something else earlier. I think an important difference we should definitely highlight when it comes to sublime and the beautiful. What else can you tell me? It is formless. It violates purpose. It offers a different type of pleasure. What else? Maybe we have to get into some examples before we can iron that one out. But there is another very important point, which is kind of like, it's paradoxical. There's something paradoxical about the sublime. I'm going to move on then. He also goes on to tell us in the next section that the sublime is absolutely great. Why does he put it like that? What does he have in mind? Absolutely, as opposed to what?
Maybe.
Maybe. Good. Along those lines, I will submit relatively. He didn't say it's relatively great. He said it's absolutely great. Oh, and by the way, this is referring to size, groß in German. Don't think great like wonderful. It's absolutely great. Do you guys understand the point here? What does it mean to say that something is absolutely great as opposed to relatively great?
That it has no comparison.
Good.
It's top
Yes.
for discussion.
Good. Something can look big in comparison to something else. And he's talking about greatness absent any kind of comparison. The sublime is absolutely great, meaning it strikes you as absolutely great immediately. And there is no need for comparison. and you will understand it as such. Okay. And here is one other interesting point he says about the sublime. This is typical philosophical speak, getting all cute. This is an aesthetical object. I told you this, right? And so it has to do with something senses, something with sensation. But this is the essential paradox of the sublime. The essential paradox of the sublime, and this is in section blah, blah, blah. Looks like this is section 25. He says, the sublime is no object of senses. What do you think he means by that? I think that's the way he puts it. Something in so many words.
Like, I feel like it kind of implies that it's not the sort of thing that can be kind of like analyzed as to why it's great. Like, its sublimeness has not come as a result of like the ingredients put into it, but it's something that's kind of more mental, or I keep saying ephemeral. But yeah.
Okay. Well, here, I'm going to call your attention to this passage, middle of, this is the very end of 25. You keep using that word ephemeral, and I will try and break that down. But let me read this passage here, the very end of section 25. He says, yeah, right. And this is where I got that quote I put in the chat. He says, nothing, therefore, which can be an object of the senses is considered to be called sublime. It's an aesthetical object, but nothing which can be an object of the senses is considered to be called sublime. But because there is in our imagination a striving towards infinite progress, and in our reason a claim for absolute totality, regarded as a real idea, therefore this very inadequateness for that idea in our faculty for estimating the magnitude of things of sense excites in us a feeling of a super sensible faculty. And this is, I'm going to read that last sentence in this section. We may therefore append to the preceding formulas explaining that the sublime, this other. The sublime is that which, the mere ability to think, which shows a faculty of mind surpassing every standard of sense. Sublime is that, the mere ability to think, which shows a faculty of mind surpassing every standard of sense. What do you think he has in mind here? Maybe we should get into an example. I think an example will probably start to make this clear. I'm going to start with an example that he gives. The pyramids. How does this example work to illustrate the sublime? Keep in mind, this is the late 1700s. And there weren't many structures like this around.
Is it like the sort of grandeur that the structures have, I guess, on top of probably being like, oh, how could these people have built something like this? Which, I had assumed that it leaves a slight feeling of terror almost at like the capabilities of humans.
Terror.
Which adds to the, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And I think what Meg said about you can't break beauty down to its ingredients. Like, you know, if you took the pyramids and broke them down, it's just sand. It's just a
Okay.
bunch of rock, but
I'm-
all together it creates this really amazing structure. And it's not just one of them, it's like hundreds of them that existed that were built like thousands of years ago.
Mhm.
So I guess it's sort of like, oh, how did they do that?
Good, excellent, thank you. That was awesome, Sunmoon. Thank you. Anybody else? Meg, hold your horses. Don't get too speculative yet. We got to figure, let's understand the basics before we get all speculative.
It was just musing. That's why I put it in the chat instead of saying it.
No, it's good. I don't want us to get drawn away from the essential points first. Then we can talk about AI. Well, actually, I'm going to read his example of the pyramids because I realize his language might be very helpful. This is in the middle of section 26, 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph. Now, by the way, the pyramids, you know, these were known all over Europe and the Middle East, and people would have traveled to see them, you know, and then they were written about and drawn for people all over that part of the world. So they were well known. He says here, hence can be explained what Savary remarks in his account of Egypt, that we must keep from going very near the pyramids, just as much as we keep from going too far from them in order to get the full emotional effect from their size. For if we're too far away, the parts to be apprehended are only obscurely represented, and the representation of them produces no effect upon the aesthetical judgment of the subject. But if we are very near, the eye requires some time to complete the apprehension of the tears from the bottom to the apex, and then the first tears are always partly forgotten, before the imagination has taken them the last, and so the comprehension of them is never complete. Chew on that. What's his point? I want to know two things. I want to know, when is the apprehension of the pyramid sublime, and under what, and what and why? Like, under what circumstances is it sublime? And when it is experienced in that way, what makes it sublime? But let's start with the first part. When? Or maybe it's, would you like to answer when it's not?
When you're far away from it.
Thank you. When you're far away.
And it's sublime when you're close to it, because you are not looking at as it is, and it's so close to you that you don't how to say this? Give me a second.
Sure. Not too far away, but also, like Andrea said, not too close, right? So I've actually, anybody been to the pyramids? I've actually been there, and you can go visit them, of course, and this being Egypt, they're rather lax. You can actually like touch them. Some people even climb them. It's awful. But then there is a popular viewing spot that is several hundred feet away, and you go out there and it's just like on a rock, and then they take pictures of the pyramids, and they can do things like this where like they put the pyramids between their fingers, you know what I mean? Like it's like right behind you, right? Not sublime. Of course, if you're standing like this with the pyramids and it's right in front of you, not sublime.
You won't see anything. If it's far away, you miss the point of it.
What is the right vantage point? How would you put it?
Mid-range?
Mid-range.
That it sounds like that.
Vanessa?
In a point that it can overwhelm you, but not be so close that you will miss everything of it. You won't perceive it completely, but if you're too far away, you miss the main points either.
Good. Good. What makes it sublime? When it is, like, what is it about that experience? We've been I'd like to hear about the definitions we've dabbled with about the sublime. We've said certain things about what defines the sublime. How is the experience of the pyramids an experience of the sublime? Sunbeam actually did a pretty good job starting us on this, but can I hear some more? All right, screw that. That was the biggest structure back in the day. Give me an example today. What would Kant count as the sublime based on what you've heard about the pyramids?
The Eiffel Tower,
Why, Jordan?
because of its size, first of all, and it's like you can easily like visit it as well. It's a very well respected monument.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also just like in the middle of Paris as well. And you can pretty much see it from everywhere in Paris.
Yeah, but
So I
that's
guess
rather like one of those situations where it was designed exactly that way. Like if we're gonna think about like meticulously planned work, like maybe they did manage to kind of create the sublime, but it feels like a situation where they really meant to. Like if you've ever studied how Paris is built, it reminds me of like the tricks that they employ in Disney, almost in their parks, where they like play with perspective and use all this like stuff to kind of replicate these kind of feelings of majesty that one might get when seeing like the wonders of the world. And that's like an interesting thing to think about, because we were just talking about how maybe you can't like kind of boil down the sublime to its elements, but there are certainly like attempts that get really, really, really close and are arguably successful at it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Wow.
Joey, you had your hand up.
I don't know if it would definitely count, but like virtual reality experiences.
Oh, God damn
Like-
it. I was hoping to stay away, but okay.
I'm sorry. Well, like it just
That's okay.
kind of,
It's fine.
I mean, if I think about like a subliminal, like or a sublime experience, like from our like point today, I think that like most people would probably agree that like when they experience something like that, if it's done well, it's kind of like transporting. It removes you from the place that you're in, kind of like turning your consciousness into like sublimating it like into a different place.
Gotcha. Okay, hold that thought. First of all, I see McShafe I see some hands when calling you guys. I see McShafe has a point here in the chat. Don't forget the next example he gives after the pyramids is the Basilica of St. Peter's in Rome. Okay, so meticulous, I don't know. And Andrea, with all due respect, I think you're wrong. I think there is a different vantage point that would make the experience of the Eiffel Tower sublime.
Which one?
If all the tourist vendors were gone. But let's see what Emerald has to say.
I wanted to argue against what Meg said, saying that the Eiffel Tower can't be sublime because it was purposely built to be beautiful. Because the pyramids were also built. They were also built to be beautiful. There was intention behind making it that way. So to say that the pyramids aren't because of like the way they are is like really reductive to the work of like the Egyptians and whatnot, and also reductive to think that someone like the relativity of what's around it makes it not with the Eiffel Tower.
I didn't mean to be reductive. I was more thinking about how that specific example of the Eiffel Tower just, I forget who was saying it, but someone was like, oh, and you can see it from every vantage point. I think I was hung up in the specifics of what I know from like Art Matters about how Paris was like built in that weird way with all of the streets like that. I didn't mean to be reductive to the work of the Egyptians. I was just talking about like the weird way Paris was designed, but I think I just got hung up in something that didn't
and
necessarily.
Yeah, because the pyramids are built in the exact same thought process.
Well, I
Because
didn't know that. Thank you.
yeah.
Well, interesting point that this is probably useful to raise here, and then we'll see what Shar has to say. You know, that this doesn't seem to come into Kant's consideration at all, right? I think if anything, the mystery surrounding the pyramids would have made it all the more sublime, like Sunbeam was getting at. It's not until very recently that they understood why they're. I think archaeologists still aren't sure exactly why they were built. They certainly didn't know how they were built. Joey points out they were covered in gold sheets. I don't think they knew that back in the time of Kant for sure. You know, these were largely.
Are you saying that they didn't know how it was built back then, or that we still don't know how it's built today?
No,
Because we
why?
definitely do.
We
And
do
we know why
know.
as well. There's like enough historical records to show that they were supposed to be monuments to the pharaohs, and just they're just giant freaking what are they called?
Tombs.
Tombstones. That's it.
Yeah, but I don't think they knew that in Kant's time, and I think
No, I don't think they did
the
either.
mystery of it would have enhanced, the experience of the Sublime, especially the point Sunbeam says, like, how did they do that? I've seen it. Those stones are absolutely ridiculously huge.
So is that insinuated that Kant thinks that, like, if you understand how something works, it can't be subliminal? Like,
I don't
it has
know.
to have that element of mystery.
I don't think so, because he does mention St. Peter's in the next line. I'm just saying that I think that mystery enhances the experience of the Sublime. I've often thought about like Stonehenge, although Stonehenge, maybe it's not so big anymore, but at the time, of course, it's been a long time since I was at Stonehenge. Anyway, Shar, what's up?
Well, I'm gonna say, in terms of the Eiffel Tower, I've been to Paris, and I think the most sublime way that I viewed it was from right below, looking.
Oh my
up
God, you're correct.
Yeah, and to the big arches, it's just so big that like you can't really comprehend how big it is at the time. You just say, wow, that's big, but you want to be able to comprehend it more. And going on kind of the thing we're having, like, oh, is it actually sublime if it was made to be sublime purposefully? Kant also brings up in his thing of beauty, I think it was our first reading on Kant, that there's two types of beauty, like I forgot what it was. One was like beautiful because of that's just how it is, like a flower or nature, whatever. And then something being beautiful because of what it's supposed to be, like a horse or a building. It's beautiful because of how well it functions in our society. And I think that with the Eiffel Tower and like the pyramids and stuff, that it still is beautiful because of what it is meant to do. The Eiffel Tower and the pyramids were meant to be sublime and grand. So I think it still counts as being sublime, even if it was made purposefully to be sublime.
Good.
All that.
Yeah, let me see. I'll see. McShafe has an interesting question in the chat. Let me say something before we get into that. My thought exactly, Shar. I think if you stand underneath the Eiffel Tower and look up, and you're like, part of you would be like, what the hell am I looking at? Think about all of the descriptors he assigns to the sublime, right? It violates purpose. It's formless. He also used the word, it's boundless. It is absolutely great, right? The problem with the Eiffel Tower on the skyline of Paris is because it's not absolutely great. And now it's comparatively great. And now it's not even the biggest thing on the skyline of Paris, right? McShafe, do you want to ask could you explain your question, please?
Sure. I just think, you have to analyze the work of philosophers in their time and the worldview of that period,
Mm-hmm.
and then elaborate based on that. So I'm interested, like, if Kant believed in God, because I think that would really affect
He did. Absolutely, he did.
how we interpret, like, if he believes sublimity can be created, because like
If it can be created. Well, he gave an example of the pyramids in St. Peter's. Those are created. You pointed out architecture is a good example. Uh-oh, did you freeze? All right, well, while she's unfreezing, Shar, you want to say something else?
Yeah, I was saying kind of like is something is actually sublime if it is created to be sublime. I mean, there's a lot of things that are created purposefully to make us happy. It doesn't mean that we're any less happy, even if it's something not coming from nature, because like, and you could even argue that people who are more religious, something coming from nature is made from God to make us happy. So there isn't really like a baseline of, oh, it's perfect. It's like the nothing made, it's like very naturally beautiful, like nothing created it. So like I think I'm trying to think of like things that are created to make us happy, like TV shows or like antidepressants, if you really want to if they help a little bit with like the regulation of like chemicals in the body, but like stuff created for the purpose of making others happy, even if it's not like natural, doesn't necessarily mean that it's like not a valid thing, and that you're not like allowed to say, oh, this is sublime or this is beautiful, even if it is like man-made. But I think I've actually read like an essay that someone wrote to help me understand stuff, and someone mentioned like a thunderstorm. I think I mentioned in my response, and a thunderstorm isn't really meant to be anything other than a thunderstorm, but it is right. Based on who you are, it could be very
well. This is why it's subjective, right?
Yeah,
that's why the sublime is subjective. Let's just be clear. I can look up at the Eiffel Tower and be like, holy Jesus, and my son will be like, what's the point? So it's going to be subjective. Good. Thank you, Abby. Right, it's right to point out there, fear of God, or well, I don't want to use the word fear just yet, but God can be an object of the sublime experience also. Very interesting point. McShafe, you got kind of cut off there. Did you want to finish what you were saying?
Sure, my Wi-Fi glitched. I wasn't trying to say that I think anything human-made can't inherently be sublime, and I don't think Kant was saying that either. He was just saying, I can't remember the exact page, but he was talking pretty early on in this part of the reading about how sublimity in art has to like mirror the vastness of nature. And I feel like you can go like too far on the man-madeness of some art things, and then it would make it like beautiful but not sublime.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out like what that line is.
Good. Well, while you work out that line, I'm going to move on to the next point because I got to make sure that certain essential things are covered. The speculation is for you all. I just have to do the dirty work. The next point he makes after explaining after mentioning the pyramids in St. Peter's, he says, these examples they don't offer insight into a pure aesthetical judgment. The issue is, what about a pure aesthetical judgment of the sublime? Now, it turns out that human-made structures are not going to be pure. For pure examples, we need to look at what he calls, in your translation, rude nature. Okay? Now, why is he making this distinction here? Well, right. I mean, see, the thing is, like, when we're talking about the pyramids, we had a discussion about how they were made and for what purpose. And that could play a role in influencing how you view it or experience it, right? Maybe if you understand it very well. I saw a very long documentary about the construction of the pyramids years ago. Maybe that will now taint my awe. Like I'll be less awestruck. Like I know how they did this. St. Peter's as well. He says, yeah, this is in section. Let me just make sure I have it for you. I believe this is section 26, right? And he says, this is another quote, he says, he wants, in rude nature, we see the monstrous and the colossal. And here's a nice quote. Past the halfway mark of 26, says nature is therefore sublime in those of its phenomena whose intuition brings with the idea of their infinity. This last can only come by the inadequacy of the greatest effort of our imagination to estimate the magnitude of an object. This is a wonderful paragraph. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4 paragraphs to the end of 26. I suggest you find it and highlight it. Nature is sublime in those of its phenomena whose intuition brings with the idea of their infinity. This last can only come by the inadequacy of the greatest effort of our imagination to estimate the magnitude of an object. Let me get back to this point. This is why the sublime is an aesthetic experience. Our senses are impacted. But he says, this was that troubling quote that I was asking about earlier, the sublime is also no object of the senses. What does that mean? It's something that can't really be captured. It kind of defies, it's something that is sensed and defies sensation at the same time. If you see the pyramids from the right vantage, the correct vantage point right up close, and it like escapes your vision, like it runs out of your vision on either side. It's so massive. You sense it, but you can't, but it's also rebels against sensation, right? The colossal and the monstrous are also examples of that, okay? I mean, that's descriptors here. That's the kind of things we're going to find in nature that will induce the experience of the sublime. He also makes a helpful distinction between the dynamically sublime and the mathematically sublime. So I wonder if anybody can speak to that. What does he mean when he distinguishes between these two?
So that was like kind of what I tried to talk about in my response. Like I used seeing the Grand Canyon as an experience. And I felt like it could kind of be used for both and mathematically, because it like my experience was walking up to it like it knocked the wind out of me, like physically. That's how like intense it was. And so like my mind couldn't comprehend how something could be that big and that beautiful and how was this made. But then it also had that fear in it as well, because it's so like it makes you realize how small you are, and like one wrong step and like you're dead and that's it. And so I feel like it kind of fits both, or for me it in my head it fit both descriptions.
Okay, thank you. I like that example. We can use that example. Anybody else want to speak to the distinction? The dynamical versus the mathematically sublime? Dynamic suggests what? Anybody got any ideas? Movement. Yes, Andrea. Motion.
I don't know, like dynamic. Something dynamic has like a lot of different aspects and layers to it that
What's-
are interesting.
What's an example of the dynamically sublime? I think someone already mentioned it.
Like an airplane.
Okay, I guess. Yeah, sure.
I definitely think that Kant would have looked up in the sky and been like, whoa, because like to them, I mean, they had seen airplanes, but like it wasn't as common, right? You know, wasn't you said it was early 1900s?
No. He's
Kant?
late 1700s.
Oh, okay, never mind. I'm way off, but he definitely
Okay.
would have thought that was sublime then.
But think about this:
Like-
the colossal, the monstrous. Okay, the dynamically sublime is in motion. Well, let me be clear: is the okay? Well, I hang on. What's the mathematically sublime? If the dynamically sublime is in motion, the mathematically sublime is what?
Like the imagination, the grade, the quantity of it.
Size.
Yeah.
So I would submit that the experience sublime, as Tanya described it, is principally an example of the mathematically sublime, as is the pyramids or the Eiffel Tower, see that the right way. So how about some examples of the dynamically sublime?
Like an ocean.
Nice. The ocean might be both, because it can be roiling, but then it's also like expansive and huge before you, right? Have you ever been the only one on a beach looking out at the ocean on both sides, maybe in winter? That's the sublime.
the cosmos.
The cosmos, right? Is that
I think
dynamic?
that one could be both dynamic and mathematic.
Yeah. How about some examples of just the dynamic though?
I had said this earlier in the chat, but like the entirety of Venice,
Well, it's not dynamic, right?
I mean, it's like consistently rising water levels is kind
Oh,
of
that kind of
dynamic.
thing.
Yeah.
How would you have to perceive it? Where would you be perceiving it from? I have difficulty with that.
Probably, I mean, I don't know. I mean, for me, I kind of already get the sort of feeling, even if I'm not physically in Venice, but
Mhm.
I guess you'd kind of have to be there. It doesn't really matter where in the city you are. It's just in Venice, I guess, being aware of
Well,
the way
there's
that your city's built.
yeah, but there's one aspect missing here. There was one aspect that Tanya described very well that kind of hits on what Kant has to say, right?
Right.
Being
That-
this nature overwhelming.
Closer.
Powerlessness.
What'd you say?
Powerlessness.
Powerlessness. Yeah. Tanya also felt threatened. There's an element of danger.
Yeah.
Okay, and not, right? There's an element of danger and not. Okay. Here's what he says in that section. This is section 27, I think. Or maybe it is, oh no, this is section 28. He says, nature, this is an example of the sublime. Nature is considered as having might or power that has no dominion over us, even while it could crush us, right?
Right, like it doesn't care. It's not aware in itself that it could do that to us.
Yes.
It doesn't matter, but we are aware of how much more powerful it is than us.
It's not a brush
Also like
with,
a waterfall.
it's not a brush with death. Okay. It's not a brush with death, but it's a recognition and an admiration of a force that could overwhelm you, but you are not personally threatened. You might catch your breath. By the way, I'm going to point, this is something he said early on, which someone mentioned, and then I think Vanessa kind of backed off, but he says that there is a momentary checking of the vital powers in the sublime. There's a checking of the vital powers. A storm could crush you. The ocean could dispense with you in a second, right?
Yeah, like the ocean is a big one for that. Like there's nothing that I love more, but I simultaneously am more terrified of than the ocean.
A healthy fear. Good. But fear is, as we'll see, is not really the best term either. There are types of fear, and this specific type of fear that he has in mind. He also says here, this is a quote in that section 28, when we are confronted with the sublime, we do not find our faculties a match for it. And then he also says we fear it without being afraid of it. Good way of putting it. We fear it without being afraid of it. Okay.
So it's kind of about like incomprehension or like brain breaking things. Like you see like the Burj Khalifa, like looking up at that and you're like, no, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm surprised nobody mentioned skyscrapers. I think, especially like
Or roller coasters.
the first time you see a skyscraper, looking up at it from the street. Roller coasters, I don't know. He didn't really talk about immersive experiences, right? He's talking about visual. So, but I don't know.
Is that why you were kind of like nah to the virtual reality?
Oh, I was not. No, I just wasn't prepared. That's all.
Because I mean, like,
I'm very
that makes
methodical.
sense,
In
though,
case
if
you
it's
haven't
not
noticed,
supposed to
Joey,
be
I just wanted to.
immersive.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I stand by that statement. I think an immersive experience is not exactly what he has in mind. Like being caught in a hurricane sucks, and that's not sublime. But seeing it from a distance and admiring the power of nature, like, that is the experience of the sublime.
Or like as far as skyscrapers, like I remember being young and being at the top of the World Trade Center and like looking down through the glass and like knowing you're not going to go anywhere, but just being like, holy shit.
Well, I think there's a tower in Toronto. When you go to the top, the floor is glass.
Yes. Yeah.
But I'm afraid of heights, so there's no
Me
fucking
too.
way I'm going on that shit. Emerald.
I think I almost lost my thought. You had just mentioned something and it had reminded me about the hurricane. That like being in a hurricane isn't sublime. I want to argue against that. It's not sublime as in like shit is being destroyed, but as someone who's been in the hurricane, there's something about when the eye of the storm passes over you. It just hit different that you can't experience being outside the storm like at all.
Yeah, that's a good example.
I agree with that totally. I've been in a hurricane as well, and it does feel like that.
Good. As long as you're not fearing for your life, like if you're on the run. I've been in a hurricane too, and when I wasn't worried about my roof, it was pretty awe-inspiring. I want to look at a quote here in section 28. This is 5 paragraphs in. He gives examples. Bold, overhanging, and as it were, threatening rocks. Clouds piled up in the sky moving with lightning flashes and thunder peals. Volcanoes in all their violence of destruction, hurricanes with their track of devastation, the boundless ocean in a state of tumult, the lofty waterfall of a mighty river, and such like. These exhibit our faculty of resistance as insignificantly small in comparison with their might, but the sight of them is the more attractive, the more fearful it is. That's interesting. Provided only that we are in security, and we readily call these objects sublime because they raise the energies of the soul above their accustomed height and discover in us a faculty of resistance of a quite different kind, which gives us courage to measure ourselves against the apparent almightiness of nature. That's a really important passage there. Pull it up if you didn't. Again, that's section 28. Because why is this passage so important? Because here he invokes the pleasure of the sublime. We haven't talked about that yet. What is the pleasure of the sublime? Spell out my question. What is pleasant in the experience of the sublime? Yeah, okay, Shar.
Oh, there we go. I think the pleasure, we're talking about like the pleasure that comes from experiencing the sublime.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the pleasure that comes from it is real. I saw something that was like the pleasure that comes from sublime is the pleasure of realizing that the external disorder does not affect your internal order.
Nice.
Something like that.
That was well put. That's good. I like it. Good. There's one quote from one of my favorite philosophers, Lucretius, an ancient Roman poet, and he said, "There's pleasure." It's terrible. I'm just warning you. It's an awful one. It's like, but there's pleasure in watching a shipwreck from a distance, not being part of it. But yeah, I think that's definitely it. Like relief at your own, like you see a storm from distance, you're like, I'm glad I'm not in that shit. But I like the way you put it though, because you put it in a way that is Kantian also, like appreciating the order within when you see the disorder without, there's some, that was nice. Because he does want to say that there is an appreciation of and recognition of our rational nature. He talks about a super sensible, he calls this a super sensible, like as an appreciation of our super sensible nature or destiny, which I've always wrestled with. And I don't really know what to say beyond that. But I think there is another aspect of the pleasure we can also get to. Again, if you pay attention to that quote in section 28, he says, I'm going to read that last sentence, the sight of them is the more attractive, the more fearful it is, provided only that we're in security, which is the point that Shar made. And we readily call these objects sublime because they raise the energies of the soul above their accustomed height and discover in us a faculty of resistance of a quite different kind, which gives us courage to measure ourselves. That's interesting. Against the apparent almightiness of nature. What happens when you measure yourself against the apparent almightiness of nature?
It's sort of like it makes you sort of try to rationalize yourself against nature and realize like it's the sort of thrill you get like at times when you think about, and he also brought this up in the text, like the infiniteness of the universe. It's like it's a sort of thrill in that it's something you can't fully understand, but it also is a little exciting to think it's like it's crazy how like when you're trying to put yourself in that perspective, even though you can't fully do it, you just for a second get that much like context, and it's like it's hard to define, but it's a sort of a thrill of some sort.
All right. Excellent. Anybody else?
I feel like, I mean, maybe I'm saying this weird, but like it's humbling in a way, but
Mhm.
that's also kind of thrilling. Like to realize like we literally don't matter. We are like these tiny little specks of nothing that have been here for like a millisecond. And so like, what's the big deal? Who cares? Do whatever you want to do. Like that's kind of thrilling because it's like we don't really matter.
And maybe we can personalize this, Tanya. Like I get so wrapped up in like, oh my God, I have to paint my bedroom and look at all of the things I have to do. And my kid, I hope my kid gets a B in science. And then you're like, oh shit, we're in a vast infinite universe.
Right. Like, who cares?
You know, there you go. Yes, Joey. I'm going to share. I'm going to talk about this in a second. I just put something in the chat. Go for it, Joey.
Oh no, I mean, I think that Tanya kind of killed it. Like she kind of said exactly what I was thinking. Like it kind of makes you feel in a good way, like it doesn't matter, like the things that you worry about and like your own problems, it puts them into like a minimized perspective, like because you realize how small you are in comparison.
Good.
And therefore your problems are also small.
Good. Speaking of, I'm going to share with you, this is called Pale Blue Dot. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. Carl Sagan, I believe he was a science fiction writer. He wrote this beautiful passage after seeing this image.
He's a theoretical astrophysicist.
Oh my God. Thank you.
He's not a science fiction writer.
Sorry, I must be confusing with someone else. I don't know why I said that. Anyway, if you look here at, I guess he's such an eloquent writer. I didn't know that he was not a writer. Anyway, if you look at, this is a picture of one of the satellites leaving the solar system, I think is like in 1990. And its last picture of Earth, that's Earth, that little dot hanging in the beam of light. And he wrote a beautiful passage about it called Pale Blue Dot. Here's the quote: "Look at that dot, that's here, that's home, that's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of. Every human being who ever was lived out their lives," right? And then look at the next paragraph. "The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely indistinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds." So yeah, I like the way he ends it. "It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another, to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known." Right. So I do think there's an element of this in the Sublime, as you guys have been insinuating, which is that, or saying, is that, there is a kind of pleasure that can be induced when you see yourself, as Andrea puts it, as small and your concerns as tiny and momentary before the forces of nature, But I think, as Abby was insinuating, like it can cut both ways pretty quickly, right? It is good once in a while to remember that this is an infinite universe and your concerns matter little, but don't try and think about that infinite universe for too long. Otherwise you will be driven to drink, because it can be so mind bending that it hurts. He does say repeatedly there's a kind of pain involved with the Sublime. I'm not sure if that's exactly what he has in mind. I think it's the recognition of something painful and threatening, like you stand on the precipice of the Grand Canyon and look down and say, like, yeah, I could die right now. Yeah. Good. Anybody have any questions or comments? Yeah, let's see what else. Well, actually, in that same section 28, he goes on below and says a couple of interesting things. He says in the middle of the next paragraph, he says, in this way, nature is not judged to be sublime in our aesthetical judgments insofar as it excites fear, but because it calls up the power in us of regarding as small the things about which we are solicitous or the things we care about. That's the point we've made, right? And of regarding its might as nevertheless without any dominion over us and our personality to which we must bow where our highest fundamental propositions and their assertion or abandonment are concerned. Therefore, nature is here called sublime merely because it elevates the imagination to a presentation of those cases in which the mind can make felt the proper sublimity of its destination in comparison with nature itself. This is the point that I was talking about earlier, which is I find a little bit difficult to grasp, which is that in the experience sublime, he wants to suggest that we also recognize our transcendent nature and destiny somehow. And I'm not going to pretend I understand how to explain that, but I just want to register that. One last point about sublime, and then we'll move on to talk about genius. This is in the next section, I believe. No, towards the end of the section, the very end of section 28. He says, you know, with judgments of taste, he says we can assume the harmony of everyone's judgment, right, with our own. But not so with sublime. Here's the point. Not everyone can or will be able to experience sublime. He's a Democrat when it comes to beauty. Anyone can admire beauty and be, you know, experience beauty, but not anyone can experience sublime. Why?
Well, yeah, I don't even think they're touring anymore.
So
It was a bad joke. Sorry.
okay. Why? Well, the experience sublime. Why? What kind of preparation do you need? Or what kind of preparation will you lack? Anybody know?
I think you definitely need perspective in order to experience the sublime, like, or at least that's the insinuation from Kant, is that, like, you know, a fool or someone who has no like perspective isn't going to look at like something gigantic or dwarfing. Emerald said that their phone died, just so you know.
Okay.
But and correct me if I'm wrong, but like I just feel like the insinuation is like that perspective is necessary in order to like a larger perspective.
Well, this is not about perspective. This is about personal preparation.
Well, I guess I don't understand that. I'm sorry.
Okay. It's a little bit of a more subtle point. By the way, it has to do with, this is really where we're talking about fear, right? There's kind of fear involved, but of a special kind, right?
I mean, is it like self-awareness a little bit?
Closer. What do you mean?
Like if you don't have any self-awareness and you don't, you know, recognize that in a certain way, then how can you really recognize how much greater something else is than you?
Oh, I see. Yeah. Good. Okay. I don't think that's the point Kant makes, but I do like what you say. I kind of agree with that. And I'm not sure why he left that out, but I think it could be related. This is towards the very end of section 28. I think. Wait, let me just make sure. No, I don't think so. Yeah, it is. Oh, it's the next one, 29. He says in the middle of that middle paragraph on 29, in fact, without development of moral ideas, that which we prepare by culture call sublime presents itself to the uneducated man merely as terrible. In the indications of the dominion of nature and destruction in great scale of its might, in comparison with which his own is a vanishing quality, he will only see the misery, danger, and distress which surround the man who is exposed to it. So the good and indeed intelligent Savoyard peasant unhesitatingly calls all lovers of Snow Mountain fools. So involved in the sublime is not fear as recognition of the terrible, but it's a different kind of fear, right? You guys understand what he's talking about here? How should we describe the fear that is operable in the sublime? I guess I'd like some synonyms.
Existential.
Maybe existential fear. What else?
So I just want to ask really quick. Can you repeat that quote that you just read again?
Sure. That's in the middle.
Because I remember reading and I was like,
29.
that's what kind of made me feel like it was about perspective. But I guess maybe if you could explain it a little bit better for me, I might understand myself.
Perspective can be used in different ways, Joey. I just wasn't sure in the way you were using it. I mean, it's not perspective literally speaking, but it's more like subjective perspective. Like,
yeah, like internal perspective, like is what I meant. Like you have to have like experience in order to.
The difference, he says, is that culture has got to prepare us for the sublime. The problem with culture is that culture is a very general term. And really what he means is like, you know, this example he gives, he can, you know, the Savoyard peasant, Savoie is in the Alps, right? A peasant who is intimately aware of the avalanches, you know, he's going to look at the mountain and see something terrible, right? This is not the sublime. Right. The sublime involves a certain kind of remove.
Okay, so that kind of makes, like, if you look at people that climb Mount Everest, the Sherpas that actually live there think that they're all fucking crazy.
Yeah. Yes. Sure. Yeah,
They just know better. Like they know, like, you're psycho. Why are you, you know, like they do it with them because they need to as a means to survive and make money. But they think that, you know, like the white people that come and climb the mountain are just bananas because they're setting themselves up to die.
Mm-hmm. Good. Or how about the guys that scale those rocks? There's a documentary on Netflix called, it's about El Capitan, which is that sheer face cliff in the, I think, Yellowstone. That's about this guy who's going to climb it without any ropes. I mean,
that's in Yosemite. That's
craziness.
That guy is crazy.
But Andrea put the term I was looking for, awe. Awe is the term, because awe denotes like respect. Awe is a kind of fear. We forget that because we use the word awesome. Awesome technically awesome. Technically, it means like fearsome, you know, but like awe-inspiring is it's supposed to induce respect, you know, and you know, and admiration. Can it be naive? Sure, I think so. But it involves a kind of removal. And the peasant who lives at the base of the Alps and knows the avalanches, he doesn't view the mountain in the same way, you know. You know, I think Kant is a little bit like looking down on that guy because he says, you know, it's a lack of education. But I think, Tanya, what you're saying is true as well. We've seen that like cultural remove can also lead to a kind of naivete. In any case, I just wanted to give that example because it indicates, you know, it gives some indication of the nature of the fear involved. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to genius, but before I know, I'm going to see if anybody has any questions or comments that they want to bring up at this point. Any last questions or comments about the sublime? And you can also have a day or two to sit on it. And if you want to raise questions on Friday, we can do that as well. And I promise at that point, I'll be ready to talk about AI and everything else Meg wanted to bring up. So why don't we get into genius? Because I only have about 15, 20 minutes before we break. And this is another very important topic here. Genius. This is another very, oh, I know what I wanted to do before we get into genius. Maybe we should talk for 1 second about this issue that James raised earlier about when we were talking about Frankenstein. Why was Sublime of interest to the Romantic period? Anybody want to speak to that issue? The reason I'm thinking of this is because genius is another very popular term in the Romantic era, but I think for different reasons. Why? I think you guys cover the Romantic period in your art history classes, correct? You guys know what's distinctive of Romanticism?
Wasn't it like Romanticism was like in response as all these signs that were of the scientific method. Everything was with the scientific method, and people was like, okay, I'm tired of this. I just want to be sensible and cute. And well, this is very simplification, but basically that was it.
Yeah, the Romantic, yes.
It was like an alternate response to it. Like
Yeah. What is the message? I think we all know enough about Frankenstein to answer this question, but what is the message of Frankenstein for science?
Leave shit alone.
Leave shit alone.
We shouldn't try to play God.
Yep.
Yeah.
Don't play golf.
And the Sublime has a different message for science. What is Kant's message about nature?
Something beyond our comprehension.
Yeah. There are aspects of nature that far surpass our meager efforts to understand and manage the world. You know, on that note, I wonder to what extent, this is something for you all to think about, like to what extent is the climate sublime? To the extent that it can be experienced. You know, it's something that surpasses our ability to understand it and tame it. It's untamable, right? Good. Let's talk about genius. Genius is a Latin word. For the Romans, it means something very different from what, and by the way Kant understands it is rather different from what we mean today. I guess I'll start with this question. Who counts as a genius, like in the press, in the media? Who is dubbed geniuses? Can you guys give me some examples?
Mensa scholars.
Who?
Mensa scholars.
Mensa scholars. Okay. I was going to ask for some names, but like, who are some famous geniuses? People who
Carl Sagan. Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Albert Einstein.
Albert Einstein. Others.
Stephen Hawking.
Stephen Hawking.
Da Vinci.
Da Vinci. What do these guys all have in common?
Oh yeah, Turing. Good one, my chief.
Hang on. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Turing, Einstein. What do these guys have in common?
Applicable knowledge, and they
What
all
field are
benefited
they
their
in?
society.
What field are they in?
Mathematics.
Science.
This is math and science. Okay. There's another realm of people in the press that are dubbed geniuses. Yes, they are men. That's true, McShafe. But I don't think it has to be. Can you think of
Why does that matter?
Can you think of some female geniuses, women that have earned the name?
Marie Curie.
Yeah, I was going to say Curie, and again, we're back in the realm of science.
I feel like it's a lot harder for women.
Eddie Lamar.
But when I think about genius in the realm of the arts, I often like think of really complicated figures I put in the text. Like there's like a menace to genius when it comes to the arts. Like it has a lot of baggage. Like when you said genius, I was immediately like, oh, Kanye West. And like, why did I think that? You know? Or like
Yeah, why did you think that? Wow.
Like, I don't know.
Okay, good. Well, I wanted to point something out. What is POG?
A very famous word.
It's like a exclamation to which one can kind of imbue their own meaning.
All right, I'll look it up later. I don't need to bog us down here.
Tanya and I both have a different meaning of POG, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Like, that was a game when we were little.
Yeah.
I was also thinking that, you know, in our culture, not only do scientists are attributed the term genius, but increasingly like brilliant business people, you know, especially if they're from like Silicon Valley, they get like Bill Gates and Sheryl Sandberg and Mark Zuckerberg. They are attributed the name genius. But the point I wanted to make is that, with the exception of maybe Kanye, but genius is, I would submit, I think, is less often used with respect to the arts. But of course, the way he's using it here is exclusively with respect to the arts. And if you paid attention, genius is not a property of science or scientists, according to Kant. It is exclusively something that pertains to the arts and artists. The other thing I wanted to point out, and I noticed in the way that Meg used it, genius, we use it now as a noun, like a person is a genius, and that is not the way it was used originally in this older form. So in Latin, genius is an attendant spirit that is present from one's birth, and it's an innate ability that like is God-given. And the Romans, in Latin, they would use it, they would say that a person has genius, right? It's not that a person is a genius, but that a person has genius. I just wanted to call your attention to that. So genius, why are we talking about genius here? Well, because someone's going on in the chat. Well, I only have a few minutes, so I'm going to press on. If anything bad happens, let me know. Genius, why is he thinking about it? Because genius is the property and talent he assigns to artists. In other words, if you create beauty, you have genius. So congratulations. If you create beauty out there, you guys, you have genius. And look what he tells us right off the bat, however, on page, well, I can't do page with you all, but this is section 45, the very end of that section. He says, I think this is it. Beautiful art cannot itself devise the rule according to which it can bring about its product. Where exactly is that? I want to make sure I give that to you. Yeah, it's the second paragraph in 46. And this is going to follow exactly what we understand. Let me make the quote again. I'm going to relate it again, and then I'm going to explain it, and then I'll explain to you why he arrives at this. It's a very logical point. I mean, if you've been following Kant so far. Beautiful art, he says, second paragraph, and actually it's in the third paragraph, excuse me. Beautiful art cannot itself devise the rule according to which it can bring about its product. It cannot devise the rule according to which it can bring about its product. There's no rule to the production of beautiful art. A genius cannot say this. And why is that? Well, this necessarily follows for Kant. If you remember, he says that there's no concept of beauty, and the beautiful experience is incommunicable. The experience of the beautiful is incommunicable. In that respect, we can't reasonably expect that there is a rule for the transmission, for the creation of beauty. Okay. He says, beauty, the beautiful art, this is the next paragraph there in 46. Beautiful art is only possible as a product of genius. Here he's hearkening back to the Roman sense of the word, which means you either have it or you don't. Because there's no rule. I don't, for example. I have always been terrible at painting and drawing. You know, the most patient genius could sit down with me and try and teach me, like try to come up with some rules, and I can't do it. It is you have to have this inborn ability. And he tells us a couple things here. I'm going to lay this out before we break, and then we can take it up next week. He says that the work of genius is, first, it is original. This is also section 47. It's a talent for producing that for which no definite rule can be given. No rule given for the production of genius. Sorry, there's no rule for it. He says it's exemplary, which means works of genius, they can only serve as an example for others, but they can't transmit a rule. They can only inspire as an example, but never give a message or a secret as to how it can be created. And then he tells us here, this is a little further in, also in 47. Oh, I see. This is in section 46. I'm completely wrong. Excuse me. This is the second paragraph of 46, right? He says the third one, it cannot describe, that is a work of genius, cannot describe or indicate scientifically how it brings about its products, but it gives the rule just as nature does. Hence, the author of a product for which he is indebted to his genius does not himself know how he has come by his ideas. And he has not the power to devise the like at pleasure or in accordance with a plan and to communicate it to others in precepts that will enable them to produce similar products. So I hope you appreciate the point here, being whoever has genius and can create beauty cannot communicate that to others. Because, as he says in that, this is the direct quote, the genius does not himself know how he has come by his ideas. Right? Just has them. I think I'm just going to go through a few more points, and then we'll open up for discussion debate at the beginning of the next class, because I think he raises some very important points here about the nature of art education, you know, that I don't think it's, I think you'll probably appreciate and agree with a lot of what he says. I don't think he's necessarily critical of it at all. Regarding this last point that it can't be communicated, genius cannot be. He says it is not teachable. Genius cannot be learned. It is not. And here's another nice quote in the next paragraph in 47. He says, midway through the paragraph, and this is where he distinguishes him, this is where genius in art is distinguished from genius in science, right? Why he's going to say that a scientist is not a genius. He talks about Newton in the middle of the next paragraph. Thus, we can readily learn all that Newton has set forth in his immortal work on the principles of natural philosophy. However great a head was required to discover it. But we cannot learn to write spirited poetry. However expressed may be the precepts of the art and however excellent its models. The reason is that Newton could make all his steps from the first elements of geometry to his own great and profound discoveries intuitively plain and definite as regards consequence, not only to himself, but to everyone else. But a Homer or a Wieland, that's a famous German poet, cannot show how his ideas, so rich in fancy and yet so full of thought, come together in his head, simply because he does not know and therefore cannot teach others, right? Newton can explain his thought process and his method, but the poet cannot. Okay, and there's another big difference too. Yes, Shar, we have sublime storms above us. I wonder if the cicadas are sublime, possibly. One last point here about art versus science, and then we will break. He says, this is a nice quote in further down that section 47. He says, art stands still at a certain point. Art stands still at a certain point, but science, of course, has progress. It is, we can discuss, this is going to come up. Hegel will disagree. Don't worry, this will come up. But from Kant's vantage point, progress is not exactly an appropriate term to talk about when it comes to art. I know that's a hot debate among y'all. We'll get there. But, science, progress, we can talk about progress in science. But how does progress in science work? It works by building on the ideas of others. Here's the point. Newton had a genius, here I go. He had a genius idea. I'm gonna be Kant for a minute. He doesn't have genius. He was sitting under a tree. He had an aha moment when that apple fell and gravity. His work built on the work of countless others before him. And then he bequeathed that knowledge and method to other generations that built. So science builds on itself. And that's where you see progress. Art does not. As Kant sees it, art is punctuated by the genius work of individuals at points throughout history. And and how they inspire one another is not by bequeathing a rule to one another, but by serving as examples of genius that inspire other geniuses in turn. And here's that quote. This is the end of that long top paragraph in section 47. He says, again, artistic skill cannot be communicated. It is imparted to every artist immediately by the hand of nature, as soon as you're born. And so it dies with him or her until nature endows another in the same way, so that he only needs an example in order to put in operation in a similar fashion the talent of which he is conscious. The genius of each artist, being incommunicable, is born with you and dies with you, and it is not imparted to others. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop there. There's a few more points to say about genius, but I don't really want to start us off on another train of thoughts. Let me pause there for a second and see if anybody has any questions or comments about genius. All right. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open our next class with some, I'm going to review it and see if I can start a fiery debate. I'm sure I will. I might even offend some people. Not me, Kant. I'll make sure Kant offends some people, or maybe you'll agree. But that's it for today, everybody. Just a reminder what's going on. For Friday, you will be reading Hegel. It's not a long passage. And you'll be doing those reading responses. And then on Friday, we'll start out maybe with a review of the Sublime, see if anybody has any last questions or comments. Definitely a review of Genius, so that we can have some discussion about the nature of art education and what can be, what can be communicated. And if you disagree with Kant, I very much want to hear about it. And then we'll get into Hegel. Okay. So I will stick around if anybody needs to chat with me. Otherwise, have yourself a wonderful day and a nice Thursday, and see you on Friday.
Thank you.
Thank
See
you.
later.
Bye-bye.
Take
Can
care.
I ask you a question?
Mhm.
I have a question as well, sir.
Sure. Mhm.